Welcome to Tuesday. I want to thank Pascale Florestal for being here today. Hi, Pascale. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Pascale Florestal. I'm the Arts Emergency Preparedness Coordinator with the City of Boston Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. And I'll be talking a little bit with my colleague, Cara Elliott-Ortega, who's the Chief of the Mayor's Office, about our guideline template. We're calling it template because it is still in a drafting phase of performing arts and cultural venues during the COVID operations.
For those who either you have your reactions or I can see your faces, how many of you were on the city call on Friday? Hands up. Cool. Okay. So for some of you, some of this information is going to be a little bit of a repeat, but my hope is that over the weekend, we had a chance to sort of think about like, oh, here's a question that I wish I had asked last week. Here's the thing that I just want to put into the room, and we will sort of take it from there. Pascale, did you have a screen share that you want to do, or are you good?
It's still very templatey, so it's like in many colors. So I think I was talking to Karen. I'm texting her now, and she's coming in as we speak. She is asking for a link. Did you send her a link? I'm gonna see if I can send her a link. But I think questions would be way more helpful for us, and so that we can better make the draft as we're still in a very first stage of it. So just because one of the things that we're trying to figure out is what's missing in it, because we think there are a lot of things because everyone is a little bit different in how they create their work and how they share space. So what are the things we need to put in it that isn't in there at this moment?
Okay.
I'm just gonna give me 1 second. I'm gonna share Cara the link and be right back.
Great.
Hi, sorry about that.
That's all right. You guys you're all very busy. You humans are some of the busiest people working right now. So I don't want to keep everybody too long. I know, like I said, you all are busy. So just looking for a recap of what you spoke to the city about on Friday. Maybe we have some questions in the chat, some questions right now specifically about outdoor spaces. Why don't we start with a recap and take it from there?
Great. So we are trying to work in anticipation of the phase 3 update from the state and working on guidelines now. And it's very much in real time. So even what we shared on Friday is already a little bit different. We're getting input from our public health commission and then also from a technical assistance provider that the city is contracted with. And this will actually be the first time since we started that contract that we'll be working with them kind of in advance of knowing what's coming from the state. So we'll really be leaning on their help to say, you know, we have a critical question from your public health expertise. How would you weigh in on this? So I think because of a combination of factors and the kind of leap that we're going to be taking from phase 2 to phase 3, this might be a situation where the city of Boston has more details and maybe even more restrictions than what the state is going to allow. So this applies to gatherings, both indoor and outdoor, how we permit outdoor events, and then what specifically we ask people to do to rehearse and perform when it comes to, you know, what rules do actors and audiences need to be following. So I can, what I'll do is maybe just talk through governor briefs at noon. Oh, that's exciting. It's always fun to just find things out in a few hours without any other heads up from but a press conference. But anyway, that's just part of the fun that we're living right now. I thought what I would do is just talk through the sections of the document and maybe lift up a couple of things in particular that might be of interest to you all here and highlight things where there are open questions. And I'll start by saying, you know, the things that we won't know until we hear more from the state are what are the limitations on gathering indoors and outdoors. So how is that number going to change? That will directly impact the permitting question. What is the definition of a small or large venue? We don't know that. Will the capacity restrictions be the same for those venues as they are for retail spaces, or will they be different? And then really what level of detail will all of this get into? Will they get into things like how far away actors should be from audiences, which is one of the things that we're wondering about right now. So I'm just going to talk through the pieces. And for the city of Boston, every industry guideline that we're producing uses a template that builds on standard state and city information. So some of that is like all the stuff that we already know, staying 6 feet apart from each other, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's broken into sections on social distancing, on hygiene protocols, which includes things like cleaning and all of that, staffing and operations. And then, sorry if I'm pausing, it's because I'm scrolling. Oh, and then cleaning and disinfecting is actually its own section. So some of the things that we're doing to add specifics for the arts and culture sector are things like thinking about dressing rooms and shared spaces that that you would be accessing. So things like lobbies, you know, how do you think about social distancing or physical distancing in those spaces? And then what are the operational considerations? So right now we have a section on considering, or a bullet point on considering staggered times for accessing. So if you are putting up a show and you have a load in and load out, or you're working on something where different people are constructing different parts of something, how can you stagger those in the same way we think about staggering the trades within construction, so that you're minimizing the number of people who are in the same space at the same time? And a lot of that also boils down to building in a lot more time around everything, right? So if you're looking at what's happening with construction right now, because they're building in all of the kind of checkpoints and temperature taking and pulling the trades apart so that they're not mingling with each other, and physical distancing and all of that, you know, now we're looking at projects that might have been done in July taking until the end of the calendar year. So it's also being aware operationally of how much padding do you need to build into all of that to make it work. Common spaces are a really big theme that we're trying to add more specifics around. So how do you limit public interactions and public access to buildings by maybe entirely closing lobby areas or other public gathering spaces within a building? Within all of this, there's information about deploying sanitizing stations, obviously having signage to help educate visitors about how to use the space. And I think with physical space generally, we are advising that people have a designated point person who's really responsible for being like their COVID workspace captain for wherever you are. And I think for organizations that are going to a lot of different spaces, that's in and of itself becomes a job, right? Because you're having to evaluate and make sure that each space is going to be, you know, you're following what that space is requiring, but you're also doing what you feel like you need to do in order to be clear for your own workers and for your audiences. So thinking through for every space that you're in, what is the flow of people? How are you queuing people outside? How are you showing people where to stand 6 feet apart? What is the pathway of circulation through the space? And how can you make that as one directional as possible, so that you're not having narrow corridors or narrow spaces where people are suddenly are clustering. And that includes thinking about things like having one person at a time using a restroom. You know, for a lot of this, then you've got to have somebody who's also staffing that and keeping, like, you know, both to communicate, but also to do some monitoring of how people are moving through the space. This gets into specifics like having one directional stairs. So if maybe you've got 3 people in an elevator at any given time going up, and then making sure that people know that the stairs are what they use to go down, so that you're minimizing people walking kind of cross traffic in those spaces. So there's a section on a lot of that. We're still building out, and Deborah was great sending us some resources and also her own thoughts on dance and performance studios. So we're still kind of thinking about what that looks like. And this is where our public health experts need to weigh in with their own opinion about whether or not contact is really something that we can advise at this time, right? So if you're not doing contact dancing or other kinds of contact, I would think like in performance, this could be a variety of things. And I don't know why like sword play is the first thing that comes to mind, but you know, if you're doing things that are going to be kind of like physical where you're facing each other, you know, and it starts to get into, for our public health officials, the reason I think about that is that our public health officials are concerned about where people are exerting and projecting. And so this starts to get into territory of how they think about fitness classes and things like that. And so I think that's something that once we have a better sense of these guidelines, it will be good to talk through maybe some specific examples of how would you even rehearse something like that, given where the guidelines are going to be. Let's see. So for the example of fitness classes outdoors, individuals have to be 6 feet apart, and then pods of fitness classes have to be 12 feet apart. So if we applied that same logic to a rehearsal, what does that start to look like? Similarly, there are recommendations that we've found from other guidelines around the country around how PPE can be affected by somebody, you know, doing a lot of work all day long. Like if you're wearing a cloth mask, you probably need to start replacing that at a certain point, especially if you're like sweating through something, then that becomes less effective. So that's something that we're looking into more. And we might just have, you know, we're not going to say like every however many hours you have to do X, Y, and Z. It's not going to be that specific, but we might have in here, like, think this through and think about how you're providing PPE in a way that makes sense for the usage for your workers in particular. And then we have some operational guidelines that talk about, if similar to, can you stagger your teams and who's using the space? Can you stagger workers? Can you disaggregate schedules if people have to be, like, really minimize the amount of time that people have to be in person with each other? Are there strategies to reduce congestion at entry points? And again, that gets back to, there's both like physical interventions, like putting arrows on the ground and putting up signage, but operationally, what can you do to make sure people understand what's being expected of them and what and how to move through that space in a healthy way. And then we also have some recommendations around not having print programs and maybe even eliminating intermissions. So thinking about, like, what are the times and ways throughout your whole process where people might be touching the same surfaces or materials, how to eliminate that. Same thing with tickets. How can you move to purely digital ticketing and not be handling paper back and forth between people? And then are there ways to operationally streamline people coming in and out of a space so that you don't wind up with a situation where there's an intermission and suddenly everybody is rushing into one public area where it's hard to monitor, hard to make sure that people are doing kind of unidirectional circulation and all of that. And I think that that's the majority of it. On Friday, we had a conversation about, you know, how are we going to handle performers wearing masks or not wearing masks, and where we are on that conversation is thinking about what kind of spacing around performers and between performers in the audience would we think from a public health standpoint is enough space such that people wouldn't have to wear masks or other kind of equipment. Other kind of PPE. And I think we are seeing a lot of organizations playing with other ways of trying to break people up or put up, kind of like businesses are having plexiglass at, you know, at checkout areas and things like that. Are there things like that that can be done where you can still see each other and hear each other, but you're kind of breaking up the space? And we're seeing some like pretty creative and sort of intense ways of trying to break people up so that you can still do things like hear each other playing instruments and that kind of thing. But that gets into a level that the city is not going to get into, right? So there's going to be a point at which, you know, our guidelines are only going to say so much, and then it's up to each person or group or nonprofit or company to figure out what their risk tolerance is and how they can adhere to the guidelines as much as possible. Or if they feel like they want to do more and put everybody in a plastic dome or something, you know, in order to be able to rehearse together or do something together. Pascale, what am I skipping over?
Nothing. I think you got most of the good stuff, the things that like are important. But I know I did see there have been some questions in the chat. I think will maybe give us some time to spend as much as possible answering as many questions people may have. So I'm happy for us to start there. Someone said, I would love to know if there have been any consumer surveys about willingness to stomach increased prices, all of these extra staff, people with limitations on people in seats, the elimination of gathering space, it all costs money. I'd be curious to know if the end consumers recognize this and are willing to throw their money into helping.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We are supporting two, one financially and one just through partnership, two audience surveys, kind of consumer confidence surveys around the arts. One is happening through Bar Foundation and the other is through Arts Boston, but they're both connecting to larger efforts around the country. And I think that, you know, the news isn't great on that front. I don't know if anybody saw, there was a New York Times article where they surveyed like 550 epidemiologists or something. And they were like, what are you going to go to in 3 months or 6 months or yeah, I know, Temples. I also shed a tear. The 3% of those over 500 health professionals said that they would wait a year or more before going back to a live event like the theater or a concert. So I think on the one hand, there's an issue there of before someone even knows how much something is costing you to do and wants to support it, are they even still going to be connected to you and what you're doing and want to go and support that? Like, do they think that that's a good thing to do from a public health standpoint? And then some of the early results of one of the audience surveys showed that although there is a general kind of understanding that arts and culture, particularly nonprofits, are suffering right now, that it doesn't seem like there's a huge amount of support for giving more money to them. So that there are other causes that are rising higher on the list for people to donate to at this time. And that it's really the people who already have a relationship with you who are going to be the most likely to give additional funding. So I mean, we'll have a lot more information on that when those studies are complete, which will be in a little while, but that's initial findings.
And I'll also mention, I know, I think it was this morning or yesterday, what is a day, that the New York Times released that the Broadway League is pushing back until, I think, the end of December, basically until 2021. So I think that also is a reminder for us all, like when the world is thinking performance can come back. Dawn had a question about if we are still on track to be in phase 3 on July 6th. Car, do you know? I imagine today we'll find out too at the press conference at 12.
As far as we know, yes, but what does that mean really? We'll see.
I realized that when I asked it, I was like, yep, that's where we are. Sorry, guys.
I do think with like all the resurgence or new surges around the country, there might be some increased hesitation. But it's complicated from a city perspective because all of our numbers are going down, like they're showing, all of our key metrics are hitting what we want them to hit. But if that's not true for other cities or other states, I mean, phase 3 includes things that are going to affect tourism. And we were just having a conversation about how we can't control really whether anyone is following state quarantine rules just because they came from New Hampshire or from wherever. So, it just starts to get more complicated. There was a question in there that I wanted to address, or somebody maybe in the chat.
Was it about the steps for outside and performing outside and identifying those steps?
It wasn't, but let's talk about that.
Yes. So Deborah asked about that. What are some of the steps, best steps to identify and access outdoor space for this summer?
Yeah. So as soon as we have the new gathering number, we're going to work with our parks and consumer affairs and licensing, which does both do permitting for public property. And we'll start to figure out what the guidelines are around that. I think, so we don't have an answer right now, but what I already know we're talking about internally are things like, are there specific ways or places outdoors just because of how they're, set up already that are easy to monitor. So how can you, basically it's all about how can you make sure that you're not getting a large crowd that isn't following the regulations that suddenly shows up because you're doing something in public. And so one way to control that is if you think about a space, like actually, cordoning it off somehow and making it really clear where people are supposed to be in the audience, and making sure that you have enough capacity staff-wise or however it is to communicate that and then also monitor it. So that's one piece. There are also some places in the city of Boston that are kind of more single entry in and single entry out, like they could be more easily monitored as opposed to just doing something like out in a field where anybody could walk up to you. And so I think that's a part of what we're trying to figure out is what are those spaces that are easier to control so that you don't have to suddenly bring in a whole bunch of barriers or rope off a space in order to make it manageable.
Yeah,
so I think, yeah.
The question I'm hearing from the dancers is both about rehearsing an activity and things that are more like performance. They understand that if they're outdoor, they may be attracting passersby,
right.
But they at least want more room to actually move. So we're looking, people are asking me both about spaces inside the city limits and outside the city limits, but the more guidance we have about what the elements are, it'll be easier to not just say, oh, this particular park is available, but here are the things that if you were on the North Shore, you would also want to be concerned with, because people are very eager to use this weather to at least get moving a little more.
Yeah, so I think it is about just controlling the crowd participation or audience accumulating outdoors more than anything else, and having a plan for that. And then I think that the spacing that we come up with for indoors would probably apply for outdoors. So if you do have, if you have to keep space between you and your fellow performers, even if you're outside, and if you have an audience, that there should still be a space between the audience and the performers of a certain distance. But other than that, I think the thing that makes my colleagues nervous in City Hall is the crowd monitoring. Which, I mean, there are things being permitted now that you could go, people could gather around, but the arts, even if it's a rehearsal, is, people could stop and stand there. And so I think, one of the things that I've been thinking about is there even signage that we could help create, or buy some stands or other things that are just available, so that somebody could just put that out, and it could be something that's very friendly, that's just like, there's a rehearsal in progress, like, feel free to stand here for a minute, don't cluster, like, move along, something like that. So I think those are the main concerns. It's not, it's mostly common sense, I think.
I also got a specific question about dance classes. I know we're moving into possibly phase 3 and 4, where the numbers of gathering can be more than 10, and people are wondering what the guidelines would be for those dance classes in terms of how they can move forward with opening or not.
Yeah, so we should be seeing more guidance for adult instructional classes in phase 3. We don't know what that will include yet. I think for the city, BPS is still, like, what they're trying to figure out is probably going to dictate a lot of what we allow and when for non-in-school kind of instruction. So I don't have a good answer on that yet. And that category is really large. So I think when the state comes out with something, it's going to be pretty generic, and we're going to have to respond to that one. But it's hard to get ahead of it, because even, like I'm saying, like BPS is still working through several scenarios, and they're working through, their indicators of what they can do and not do have not gone through the paces yet. That's still all being reviewed. But we know that that's a big one. And I even had, I've been having conversations with Joyce Linehan and a few others, because I think there hasn't really been an understanding of how many dance studios there are, or like how many things kind of fall into this category. And so we've been, it was one of those things where we looked at that one bullet point in the state's announcement that this was going to be coming, and we're like, wait a minute, this is huge. So we'll definitely have to circle back on it. And I think it'll require more specifics.
Cool. There was a question about teaching artists. Is there any hope for work or residency performance in schools, or is there any directive to schools to try to continue contract relationship with artists, but on virtual platforms?
Yeah, so like I was saying, that there are still these scenarios being worked out. I think that even if schools are reopening for in-person instruction, it's very unlikely that they would be bringing in partners into that space. But I think it is possible that they could be doing so virtually. But I would not, at least from a business model perspective, count on being able to go into classrooms.
And I think Laconian from CMCB mentioned this, like some programs have stayed on with some schools have stayed on with some of his programs. So it's probably a case by case situation depending on where the schools are in their budgets. But I know that we are planning, Cara, if I'm not mistaken, another virtual convening with EdVestors on teaching online virtually, I believe. That's coming in July. Am I making that up, Cara?
No, I don't think we have a date yet, but that's
yes.
For folks who do a lot of work with BPS, that would be a good call to join in on, because we have Tony Beatrice from BPS and others who are really tied in, who can help kind of illuminate what thinking is going on from within their organization.
And that would be a great place to bring this kind of question to as well. So I believe we're still solidifying a date when that will be, but once we have it, we'll let you all know, especially at our next Friday meeting, which will be on July 10th, not this Friday, because of the holiday. So just a reminder. Great. I think there was maybe one more question. When will the city guidelines come out?
So they will come out after the state guidelines, or depending on how much of a heads up we have on what's in there, at the same time as the state guidelines. They won't come out ahead of state guidelines because there's just too much that we need to know in order to fill in the gaps. So that's going to depend, on when phase 3 actually happens. If it's July 6th, you should see them right around July 6th.
I think those were all the questions in the chat. There are a few comments. I don't know if anybody else has questions or other topics that they'd like some more information on, or things that they, like I said, that they feel like is missing, or other aspects that they haven't heard that might be important for us to look at as we continue this creation of this guideline.
Friends, as people have things that maybe come up, would you like them to email Pascale directly? Is that... Sorry to keep throwing you under the bus, Pascale. I'm literally looking at you like, sorry.
Yes, please. Documentation is important.
Great.
I know what I was going to say from earlier, just before I forget for a second time. From that, those initial findings of the audience surveys, one of the things that was pretty clear was that although audiences are enjoying the intense amount of virtual content that we're giving them, it doesn't actually do for them like what they want from the sector and from our work, which is like actual human connection. And I think I just want to say that because I know like a lot of us have just been like killing ourselves to turn things around and do them digitally and try to provide as much as possible that we would have and do it online. And, no one's making money from doing that. And so I think I just say that as just like a note of caution, and also maybe some permission to take a step back or slow down on that, because even though it does have a feeling of keeping visibility, it's not actually producing the thing that makes people feel most connected. And I don't know if people have been experiencing that themselves as they do it, but I want to keep saying that because I just know everyone's really hurting themselves trying to do it.
Yeah. right, like when this all started, I think there was sort of a mixed feeling in the community. There's like one track that was like, we have to produce something digitally. We've got to stay out there. And trying to find the thing that is that fulfilling, right? That sort of has that human contact piece is hard. And there were some people who were like, no, we're going to hang back because this is about the live aspect, the community gathering. And I think there have been some really great strides, right? Some people have managed to capture that feeling. Some of us are still trying to figure it out, but the idea that maybe we can have a little permission to like back off a little bit is, for those who need it, great. For those that are going to press on, like you do you. The end scene. So if there are no other questions, Cara, can I get you to talk about the inclusion piece?
Yeah, so we had, I feel like every week we're just awash in city announcements. But last week, we found out that we are getting a new equity cabinet at the City of Boston, which is going to combine a few other departments, including immigrant advancement, the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Racial Equity, immigrant advancement, the Diversity Office, and the Human Rights Commission. I believe I'm hitting all of them. And that we were going to get a new Chief of Arts and Culture. That's me, Chief of Equity. And that was announced yesterday. It's Carolyn Crockett. And I don't know if people have had experiences with her. I love her. I'm so excited that she's going to be the person who, it's going to be, a very difficult job and a lot to figure out, but incredibly excited for our office and to just personally be a co-conspirator to her in that role. If you don't know her, she published the book People Before Highways, which was getting a lot of attention this past year. She has a real background kind of around community organizing and really understands the work that we all do and the importance of kind of telling their own stories and telling local stories about their neighborhoods. She worked in the Office of Economic Development, doing work around small business, and then went back to MIT to teach in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, which is where I got my planning degree and where I met her for the first time. She was teaching a class on failed plans, which is great. So anyway, it's just like a love fest for me that she's the person who's doing this. She has experience working in the city. And she also has this, really deep experience around community and research. And I think all of that is going to be great to bring to the table. Within that cabinet will also be a equity fund, a racial equity fund. And I believe there's a web page up on the website now that I might be able to find quickly and put into the chat. Arts, youth engagement, supporting nonprofits. There's a lot of different areas that they want to hit. I think that there's still, there's still things to be worked out there, but they're hoping that it's going to surpass the Resilience Fund, which would be over $30 million. They want to start with a $10 million goal. So this is a big deal. And, I think we're well positioned to help figure out how that funding could support the arts. And so those are the conversations that are happening now and that will keep informing. And I think, it's hard to know with a city fund like that exactly what the structure can be. And, is it just going to be grants to organizations? Will there be able to be more kind of support around it or not? And so I think that's all still needs to be discussed and figured out, but it's a huge opportunity and we're really excited about it. I don't know if there are any questions specific to that, but I'm happy to try and answer them.
I think for me, a question just when does it kick off? When does this, are folks doing things now? How do we? Yeah,
there hasn't been like an official launch yet. So there's this page on the website that I'll find. There is a section for organizations who I think already want to express interest or want to hear more. You can submit something now. I'm not sure if that puts you on like a mailing list for updates or if there's more to it, but I can send that link out so that people can go ahead and get in touch.
That'd be great. Excellent. All right, friends, if no one else has any questions, nothing in the chat, and I don't see hands raised, then what we will do is let everybody go. Get your quick water break before heading over to the MCC goodbye, if that's what you're doing, or starting on the rest of your day. Thank you so much for meeting us with the time change. We really appreciate it. And just a reminder, the city call is not happening this Friday. Great. So no city call this
I'll
Friday.
be sending an email.
Dope.
I'll be sending an email to everyone with the update for next Friday as well. So just look out for that probably today.
Great. Thanks, Cara, for the link. Everybody get it. We have this recording. Pascale, I will send it to you. It'll be up on our website in the not too distant future. Thanks, Pascale. Thanks for Cara for being here with us today. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great Tuesday.